been a little while, hasn't it? I'm back. Let's go. So, as some of you know, I love to read. I love books. Yada yada yada. I think they're great. They improve your mental skills. They help you learn shit. And just generally, they're just it's quite a relaxing way to spend your time. And as we know, a year is over. 2020, I'm going to make a video on that specifically anyway. But 2020 is over, and that means another list of books that I have finished. And in this video, I'm going to focus on the top 5 books that I read in 2020. The ones that I think maybe you should check out, why you should check them out, and just generally, I like them. So, number 5 is The Psychopath Test by Jon Ronson. Now, this is a pretty interesting book. I know it's quite popular. I know a lot of people might have already read it. Basically, the general consensus is that the main character goes around and interviews different people from around the world and sort of tries to discern if they're psychopaths, what a psychopath is, and sort of looks at the diagnosis of psychopaths and sort of finds out that, is this really right? Is this really ethical? You know, where am I going with this? And he actually interviews Bob Hare, a guy that created a checklist of 20 items of psychopathy, and then he goes out in the world and tests that. And I think this is actually based on a true story. So the guy actually did this, but you wouldn't think that is based on a true story based on how it's written, because he writes it like quite funnily, if that's even a word. He writes it in quite an entertaining way, and I just really enjoyed reading it. It's quite a page turner as well, and it's also quite educational, so you know, you can't fault it for that, of course. Now, the fourth book, my fourth favorite book that I read in 2020 was this book, The Way of the Wolf by Jordan Belfort. So I'm guessing a lot of you have seen The Way of the Wolf of Wall Street. Leonardo DiCaprio, I think most people have seen it. It is one of my favorite films. This book is written by Jordan Belfort, so the guy that is actually starred in that film. He talks about his sales tactics, how he kind of got to the top, the techniques he used from a psychological basis to a social sort of basis, even to the way you stand. And I learned a lot of useful tricks when I was working in a sales job earlier in 2020. It was very helpful when I was competing with other brands to sell the products that I was selling. He does emphasize that there's an ethical aspect to it, but I think he only kind of said that because of the film and because he didn't have the best reputation. I mean, the guy did come out of prison. But I digress. I really enjoyed the book. If you have any interest in sales, persuasion, psychology, anything like that, I think the book is a good read. It's probably one of the better persuasion-based books that I've read, but this is maybe because it's sales. I've read other sort of persuasion books as well, like How to Win Friends and Influence People, but they're less catered towards sales. I think they're more towards like getting people to like you. Obviously, it's in the title. And the main idea is that you're bringing the customer along the straight line. You're sort of at the beginning discerning what sort of customer they are. You're sort of discerning what sort of customer they are and how interested they are in the product. And you, as the salesman, your job is to try and move them along that straight line and get them from a sort of cold buyer to a buyer in heat, to the point where they're asking you for the product. They want the product. You know what I mean? Now, my third favorite book of 2020, this actually did come out in 2020 as well, is Cant Hurt Me by David Goggins. Now, I love David Goggins. He is one of my favorite self-help sort of, I wouldn't say self-help, but more motivational speakers out there, because I think he's the realist of them all. This sort of talks about his backstory, his life, and where he came from. And he's had kind of a rough upbringing, and that's what sort of helped him to become this crazy guy that he is, you know? He has a pull-up record, he has done multiple Ironman runs, he's done ultra marathon runs, and just generally his mentality behind life is just not to settle and just to always be pushing yourself every day in any way you can. The book does try to sort of add these little tips that you can do to sort of improve yourself and these little self-help little nuggets here and there, but I think he only did that to sort of market the idea that it's a self-help book to get more people to read it. It's basically an autobiography. There's a few tips here and there on how to improve your life as well, but I didn't really read it for that. I think this guy is just incredible, and if anyone wants to check out the life of this crazy guy, give it a read. So my second favorite book that I read in 2020 is The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. Now, I know that this is probably one that people have read before. It's quite a popular book, quite well known. I had it for a while, it was on my shelf, and I had nothing to read, so I decided to read it, and I loved it. It's actually a fiction book, which isn't something that I usually read, but I did enjoy the fact that it was sort of based in Nazi Germany, and it was about a little girl that sort of collects books, well, steals books. And she talks about her time living under the Nazi Germany rule, and the story of how she had a Jewish stowaway in her basement, and sort of describes that experience. And I think in a lot of ways it's very heartwarming, and I actually did cry at one point reading it, because it just is quite a touching story, and it talks about her relationship with her foster father and how she kind of builds this really sweet, warm bond with him. And I don't know, it's quite, the story is quite, not a lot really happens in the story, like for quite a long book, but I think it's the little small moments that it does very well. And if you just want like a very wholesome but also very sad story at the same time. I'll give it a read. It does talk about death a lot as well, and it does give you this like sort of appreciation for life and not living in the sort of world that a lot of people really did have to live in. And yeah, I just think it's not too dark considering what it is, but it's pretty dark given the circumstances. I don't think you need to make Nazi Germany much darker, especially if you know the history of it. The Book Thief, great book. Give it a read if you want quite a heartwarming story, and even if you want to learn more about Nazi Germany from a child's perspective, go for it. Now, number one, yes, I know it's not the most like unique choice. I know it's a bit obvious, but number one is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Okay, so this year, last year, I did spend a lot of time in the last few months because I was going through quite a difficult time going through Buddhism, learning about the power of presence and reading A New Earth as well by Eckhart Tolle. So a lot of the stuff that he says in the book now is quite basic to me, but when I first read it, wow, like even my mum, someone that doesn't read, when she was going through a hard time, she read a few pages of it and she really enjoyed it too. What The Power of Now basically is a book sort of talking about how to stay present and sort of feel your emotions fully. I don't know how to really describe this book without making it seem too simple, but it is quite a simple book. It does really help as well if you are going through a difficult time, because it does sort of remind you that your thoughts do create your pain, your suffering, a very Buddhist idea, and that if you can kind of focus your attention on the present moment, you can kind of release that anxiety and that stress. And it definitely did help for me. You know, after reading a lot of other stuff, like I said, it did seem a little bit basic, but for someone trying to get into sort of Buddhism or the idea of being present, and just generally if you want to have a better life and a more peaceful life, I'd say read it, because it's very accessible and very easy to read, and it's also very short. I think, last time I checked, it's barely 200 pages, so yeah guys, hope you enjoyed. I'll be making some more videos soon. I'm back. I'm not going to take another 6-month hiatus, but I'll be back. I've got a few more videos planned. Hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll catch you soon.